From what started as a small studio project to what has now generated billions in revenue, a Marvel executive recently opened about the MCU's biggest changes since Phase 1. Let's take a look at what he said. According to Steven Broussard, he believes the MCU has stood the test of time, and it's easy to see where this success came from. Sure, the MCU's changed a lot since it first started, but it wasn't an overnight change. As the producer behind Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and the VP of Production and Development for Marvel Studios, Steven's seen the studio grow through the years, which is exactly why he talked about the biggest changes he's seen at the company since it started in 2008. Because before Walt Disney bought Marvel Studios was apparently a very small operation, but they still managed to prove themselves. Of course, it's not like that anymore. Since Infinity Saga, Marvel Studios' operations have been growing. After Iron Man came out in 2008 and kickstarted the MCU, the franchise has since grown to become the most financially successful in movie history. It now has 4 of the 10 highest-grossing movies of all time. After Ant-Man 3, the MCU made more than $28 billion around the world. Phases 5 and 6 will continue to build a lot of hype over the next couple of years. Broussard still promised that not much has changed on the inside of the team. They still use their love of movies and respect for them to tell the best stories they can. Kevin Feige can't be as hands-on with the brand as he used to be, but he does everything he can to be as involved as possible with the MCU movies and shows as they continue to tell this big story, even though it's unclear how much bigger Marvel Studios' process and story can get, especially since so many new characters are coming. But Broussard and the rest of the team are determined to keep the same passion that's driven them since Phase 1. Broussard ended by giving Kevin Feige a lot of credit for setting the creative tone for the studio. Of course, there are some obvious changes too. Aside from how the MCU has now grown production-wise, there's changes to the storyline depictions too. Most movies now have female leads, and there's more focus on TV shows. In Phase 1, there are no movies with the name of a female character in the title. Black Widow is the only important woman lead in the Avengers. Unlike the DCEU, the MCU didn't change this quickly. Phase 3's Ant-Man and the Wasp is the first movie to have a female lead, but even then, she still doesn't have much of a spotlight. By Phase 4, shows like Captain Marvel, WandaVision, Miss Marvel, Black Widow, Hawkeye, and She-Hulk had become the standard, even though there have been quite a few MCU shows over the years.
The Hulk asks for balance. You have so much more to learn.
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was the only one in Phase 1. Over time, the value of TV shows has grown a lot, to the point where Phase 4 gave them all the same weight. WandaVision and Loki both lead into Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But it's not just the female leads and the focus on TV shows that's changed. Stories are told out of order on purpose, and there's a lot of crossovers now. The MCU now tells stories out of order on purpose so that we have to guess where they fit in. Since exact dates aren't given out, we have to piece together details to figure out the order of events. During Phase 1, movies could only include Easter eggs and small nods to other superheroes. It all came to a head in the Avengers, but this movie was all about working together. Bruce Banner's cameo in Iron Man 3 was the first time a hero was seen in a movie on its own. But that was before Captain America: Civil War made it the norm for heroes to have parts in movies on their own. These kind of crossovers have made it possible for people who wouldn't normally meet to become friends. In Thor: Love and Thunder, the Guardians of the Galaxy and Doctor Strange appear together. And in Spider-Man: No Way Home, the Guardians of the Galaxy and Doctor Strange appear together. Since Phase 1 was mostly about figuring out where each character came from, there wasn't much room to set in stone for teaching relationships or for overall aesthetics. But there's more focus now on mentor-protege dynamics and set themes in movies. In Phase 2, Tony Stark became a guide to Harley Keener, and in Phase 3, he took over the role of a father figure to Peter Parker. That's how the whole mentor-protege storyline became the MCU's go-to way to pass the role from one character to another. Also, in Phase 1, the only things that made one movie different from another were how they didn't follow any complex plots. At the core of each film was a theme that tied it all together, like Thor being a god and Captain America being a guy from the past. The general style of these movies was the same. They were all superhero pictures with different plots. Phase 3 started to change this by putting more importance on things like music, color schemes, improvised dialogue, and environmental backgrounds to make movies really stand out. Through these kinds of themes, each MCU movie can be different from the others. Plus, let's not forget, there wasn't always a connection between different movies, and the villains were boring. Now, the end of Phase 1 is a bridge to the next, and villains are actually sympathetic. The Avengers was the last movie in Phase 1 that brought together all the pictures that came before it. Since then, the MCU has changed it so that the last movie of each phase is the one that sets up the next story. In Phase 3, Spider-Man Far From Home showed how the snap changed things, and how Tony Stark's story ended.
The world needs the next Iron Man.
You going to step up or not?
This set up Phase 4 to tell more stories about how the snap changed things. Except for Loki, all of the villains in Phase 1 were the standard bad guy. In the Avengers, Loki's plans to take over Earth didn't make anyone feel sorry for him. By Phase 3, the MCU started to show the bad guys' points of view. This gave them more depth, and made it easier for me to feel sorry for them. The MCU likes these kinds of villains, because they keep fans interested in all parts of the story, even if that means making the enemy look good. It wasn't just the villains that changed though. Supporting characters improved, and romantic storylines were toned down. In Phase 1, the job of the main character's sidekicks was just to move the story along. These figures didn't do much besides show up when it was important to the main story. Things have changed since then, and now secondary characters are getting their own storylines. Because of this, Phase 4 has made movies and TV shows that are all about people who used to be in the background. The way the MCU treats characters like Black Widow, Loki, and WandaVision shows that it has changed its mind about how to handle them. It's easier to pick out the best and worst MCU partners from Phase 1, especially when the main characters were more likely to have a love interest. Even though romance is still important, the MCU has toned it down. They did this by giving the people who are supposed to be in love with each other real personalities. These characters are now more than just the love interests of the main character. They also have their strengths and personalities. In movies like Thor Ragnarok, Doctor Strange, and Captain Marvel, there are no love stories at all. Instead, the main characters' journeys are the only thing that matters. With that, that's all for the MCU's biggest changes since Phase 1. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.